I wouldn't recommend anyone use it honestly unless Good morning, friends! In this video, I'm going to tell you about my opinion on the usefulness and dangers of nasal tobacco. But before I do, please subscribe to the channel if you're not already, like the video, and comment on the video for the sake of the algorithm. Now, first of all, to introduce the subject to you, nasal tobacco is called snuff. This area of your hand is actually called the snuff box because historically, inhaling tobacco was one of the first forms of using tobacco introduced to Europe. In fact, it was one of the first forms of using tobacco in general. Native Americans often, I guess they sort of invented snuff. Now, why do I know about snuff? The reason I know about, actually I know about stuff, it's a very indirect path. But what I wanted to do in this video is that I recently received a question from a subscriber, which I thought I could answer very quickly, about my experiences and my experiences with snuff and my favorite snuff brands. In this video, I'm going to answer those questions. First of all, I'm going to tell you what I think snuff is useful for. The reason why snuff is useful is because of its delivery mechanism. Both the membranes here on the interior area of your nasal canal, but also your nasal canal technically joins to something in the brain called the olfactory bulb. You'd need a nanoparticle, a very small particle, to pass through that blood-brain barrier at the end of that canal. But what I've noticed, that's what's known in science. So in science, it's thought to be that, or in research evidence, it's thought to be that when people use cocaine, it's mostly absorbed in the nasal membranes. But I believe that some of it is still absorbed directly into the brain or somehow much quicker into the brain through experience. This is what I've noticed. It's particularly regarding my experience with nasal tobacco. This is what really taught me it. Because I used to be a smoker for about 15 years. And I've used oral tobacco for a long time. Not American oral tobacco, but Swedish, which is called snus, which is also related to the same derivation of the word snuff. But I've tried different methods. And just for those that don't know, the quickest way you can get something in your bloodstream usually is to inject it into your blood. And the second quickest way is often to smoke it. But interestingly, the first note I'll tell you positively about nasal snuff, in the morning it wakes you up more than a cigarette would. It is very stimulatory in a way that's incomparable to cigarettes or oral tobacco, in my opinion. It's also a laxative, probably because of that reason. So if you have issues going to the bathroom in the morning, taking one pinch of snuff will probably end your problems. There are two more things that snuff can be valuable for, I think. One is for lifting. I think that snuff may differentially, you know how there are studies that show that supplemental choline or alpha GPC, for example, is thought to improve exercise performance. The way that choline can improve exercise performance, nicotine can also. And it can do this in the nervous system. The quickest way, I think, to get it in the nervous system before a lift would be to do some nasal snuff. Or not maybe the quickest, but the most effective. It's more effective than smoking. So there's no option that's more effective than it, in my opinion. But finally, the most valuable reason to use snuff, and really the reason I tried it, was just to experiment for people that are trying to quit smoking cigarettes. You see, using oral tobacco, even if you use a high nicotine content, for most people it'll completely remove their desire to smoke, because it gives them something to do and gives them the same taste as tobacco and the same kind of nicotine in the same format. But for people who are not satisfied there, even with high nicotine snus brands like G3 or Lab 06 or these kind of brands, if people are not satisfied there, they can then use nasal snuff. They'll find that combining the two, you will not desire a cigarette. There's no way. Now, if you're using oral snus, which is quite healthy throughout the day, and then when you're bored, you want a cigarette throughout the day, you take a little pinch of snuff, you'll find your desires to smoke will be completely abated. So for this reason, it's quite valuable. My concerns with nasal snuff, though, there's a few concerns. The first one is, so for those that don't know, tobacco that is fermented, like American oral tobacco, is highly carcinogenic because of its N-nitrose related compounds. Snus from Sweden is less carcinogenic and government regulated. It is not fermented. The problem with the snuffs is none of them are government regulated. We don't really know if they're fermented or not, and we don't know what else they contain in them, like sugars, which would make a lot of these issues worse, but also pollutants. So we don't know anything about them. And introducing them, a second concern, as I said before, you go directly to the brain here. There's a blood-brain barrier, and there's also this vascular system in the nose, I think, somehow delivers nutrients quicker to the brain. So there's less of a potential for your body to filter these pollutants, and you may specifically locally, cause inflammation in the brain as opposed to other parts of the body compared to smoking, for example. I think that the nasal tobacco really localizes the nicotine into the brain. To be honest with you, a great idea would be nasal nicotine. This is a great product for someone to invent, by the way. But give me some credit, please. But if somebody creates a nasal nicotine product that is tolerable, it'll be way more effective, doesn't have this carcinogenic effect, it's perfect. There's no reason, honestly, unlike oral tobacco, the pleasure of inhaling tobacco is not that high. The taste isn't that great, you don't really taste it in your nose and so on. And finally, I've noticed personally, although I determined now that the reason my nose has been irritated recently is not because of the nasal snuff, but the nasal snuff, which I barely used, by the way, recently, very like 3 times a week, something like that recently, that caused me the irritation, it did contribute to it. I seem to have some allergic skin condition going on currently, but what I've noticed is that my nasal canal is irritated by the nasal snuff more than what I notice my mouth is irritated by oral snus. I'm almost completely confident that the snuff has more carcinogenic compounds than the oral snus. So I wouldn't recommend anyone use it, honestly, unless you're going to use it by the way, it's not highly addictive. It's really not. If you're going to use it very sparingly, like literally in the morning, or right before a workout, it could be useful for your arsenal and not that harmful, but I wouldn't use it instead of snus. I wouldn't use it as my daily tobacco companion. I would be concerned about the inflammation it could cause locally in the brain. I have noticed that sometimes when I use nasal snuff more than once a day, I felt exhausted mentally, which I've never experienced something like that before. So these are my warnings about it. Regarding brands, every brand I tried sucked except for Toke. Toque. Toke has a strong version, which is fantastic. And it has another version, which I don't remember the name of. I think it's called SP Extra, something like that. But those are really fantastic. Toke is great, but the other brands I tried, which were English, were horrible. Toke is, I think, German. Anyway, friends, I hope this was helpful for those of you that were interested. I'll see you again this afternoon.